Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk ABM with me, Declan, CMO of account-based marketing agency Strategic ABM. ABM is one of the hottest B2B strategies right now, helping companies to win, grow and retain their most important accounts. This podcast allows me to spend some time talking to account-based marketing leaders about their ABM programs and share their insights with other B2B marketers, wherever you are on your ABM journey. Today, I'm actually joined by Alex Embling, who's the CEO of our agency, Strategic ABM. Alex, thanks so much for joining me today.
Good to see you, Dec.
Well, I thought, it's about time. I've been thinking about interviewing you for a long time as part of Let's Talk ABM and as part of kind of the podcast that we do, etc. And I thought it'd be interesting to get your take. You've been involved in B2B marketing for 20, 25 years. I've known you for probably about that time or a little bit less. First as a client, I was a client obviously of the agency, and now I'm part of the agency as the CMO. So let's talk a little bit about the last 20 years, because obviously Bev Burgess, who we all know and respect and admire, she coined the term ABM and the methodology back in 2002, 2003. So we are celebrating the 20th anniversary. How do you see the kind of last 20 years of ABM? I know we've been involved in it for 6-7 years as a pure play ABM agency, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've been involved in it formally for the last sort of 6-7 years, but I guess we've been inadvertently involved in it unbeknownly for much longer, because our clients have always been those sort of global technology brands, with long sales cycles and lots of people involved in the buying decisions. So we have been involved in it. I mean, it's evolved dramatically. I don't think the principles have changed. I think the fundamentals of being more relevant to fewer people have been around for decades, not just in the last 20 years. But obviously, technology, data, the fact that the buying journey happens way in advance of you actually having contact with the account you're trying to engage. I think all of that has changed a lot and has obviously impacted the way programs are run, where the priority investments are made, all of that really. So, and also the expectations on sales and marketing teams, because of the investment that's being made into ABM programs now, clearly impacts how people run their programs and how they prioritize their activities. So obviously technology has been the biggest disruptor and had the biggest impact on ABM programs over the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose you think back to that, I think it was a conversation or a lunch or a dinner that Bev was at 20 years ago now with Accenture and Unisys. They were talking to her about client-centric marketing and the idea of dedicated teams working internally within one account to actually get deep into that account, so that account could actually benefit from all of their services. And interestingly, they were consultancy companies as opposed to, manufacturers or technology vendors. But as you mentioned then, technology has been the game changer and has probably stolen a bit too much of the headlines really in the course of the last few years, whereas we have this kind of conversation always about, the use of technology and what's required and how much technology do you actually need to get started with ABM. And I think because obviously these technology vendors who've come into the ABM space obviously have had big budgets and big marketing budgets, they've managed to grab a large chunk of the conversation. But would it be fair to say that what is the level of technology that is required to? Let's start with a couple of scenarios in terms of ABM. Give us a scenario around a company which has got a good go-to-market strategy, but is looking to implement ABM for the first time. So they would be relatively immature from an ABM point of view. What does that kind of approach look like?
Well, there's the approach that we would recommend, and there's obviously the approach that a lot of companies take. They're two different things, and I think a lot of the mistakes that companies make are that they start with the technology, they see it as a bit of a golden bullet, and obviously there's more pressure on sales and marketing teams and commercial teams than ever before because of the levels of investment that are going into these businesses. So naturally, human nature is you look for a quick fix, and quite often technology vendors are selling Nirvana, and technology doesn't solve strategic issues. It only scales bad decisions. So I think you can start with minimal tech stack. If you think about what you need in order to measure, and that's the important question to ask, yourself internally or aligned with the business teams, the C-suite. First thing is, how are we going to report on success? And obviously we use the 3 R's model: reputation, relationships, and revenue. But there may be some other models that people want to adopt to, clearly quantify the incremental progress sales and marketing teams are making with a set of accounts or a strategic account. So I think priority needs to be align with your C-suite, the guys that are giving you the dollars to invest in this program, align with them how to make to report on that progress, and then reverse engineer from there, really. And quite often it doesn't require technology. ABM is just historically difficult to report on because there are obviously digital touch points, and that's you can solve that with varying degrees of technology. And then there's offline soft qualitative data that is harder to capture. So key account programs, ABM programs will always require online, offline, qualitative and quantitative data. And obviously you can resource that appropriately with technology, but obviously you've got to get your teams bought in across the business to be able to facilitate those qualitative inputs as well. So I think to answer your question, start small. Get your ABM program right. Reverse engineer from revenue. Figure out what is closest to revenue, and then build your strategy off the back of that. Look for those opportunities, those touch points that you can have biggest impact on over the next month. Focus your energy there, and then that will start to build the business case internally, build more credibility, which will then obviously in turn unlock more investment. But get those really clear reporting measurements in place first. Get that aligned and agreed internally before you do anything, and then build your plan off that.
Well, it's an interesting point. It kind of reminds me of I spent a summer locked in a room once, building a new Salesforce implementation for our company, and the Salesforce consultants, they spent probably 2 or 3 weeks digging into us. What reports did we want? They weren't asking what data did you want to collect. They weren't asking us what functionality. They just spent so much time looking at the reporting because they were basically using the reporting as the way to build the actual system for the company I was working for at the time. So I think it's really interesting the point you're making there about starting backwards with the reporting. What do you want to report on? Because ultimately you've got a lot of people to talk to in the business. You've got a lot of people to keep on your side, not just within marketing, but also your sales colleagues, and obviously then the C-suite or the whoever.
It's important because, and also, what you report on will change and evolve over time. Because if you've got a 12, 18 month sales cycle length, you've got to be realistic with these objectives. You're not going to get to revenue in the first 2, 3, 4 months unless you start working on opportunities that are already sort of heavily down the sales cycle. So you need those measures and checks and balances in place to see how you're improving. Benchmark your account penetration status, from the offset, and where are the gaps in your relationships? How are you improving those relationships? How are you going to measure the quality of those relationships? How is your reputation and trust building within those accounts? And get those metrics, agree those metrics before you start, and then make sure everything feeds into those. But you've got to get the alignment with the guys that are investing in it first.
And that was obviously talking around the more kind of immature companies that are coming to ABM, and I suppose as ABM has come to the forefront in the last few years, also become more and more popular as a go-to-market strategy in a way of answering some of these kind of key growth questions. But what about the kind of companies that we work with that are much more mature, that have been doing ABM for longer, that have been doing different ABM programs, one to many, one to few, one to one? What do you see there in terms of what are some of their challenges?
Well, some of the more mature companies typically started 10, 15 years ago, and they would have started with one-to-one, largely because the technology didn't exist to attempt to scale to one-to-many. One-to-many didn't really exist as a concept years ago. It's only technology that's allowed one-to-many programs really to become a thing. And obviously, then you've got all these technology vendors that are facilitating that. But if you start off with one-to-one, a typical remit for a one-to-one, it's very, unless it's an RFP, it's very rarely new client acquisition as an objective. It's more about growth and retention. So just by definition, if you've got a growth and retention objective, then your measurement for success there is going to be relationships, quality of those relationships, new cost centers that you're starting to engage. So your metrics change, or they're more around the reputation relationships bit, which will obviously then lead to revenue further down the line. So I think those more mature companies have a different lens. They've already got revenue coming in from those clients. It's about how they can grow their footprint, how they can be strategically relevant, change perceptions. There's a lot of clients that we're working with that have that objective. There's been an internal change in decision-making units, and those relationships have gone, or maybe they're seen as a product vendor and they want to be seen as a solutions consultancy. So the objectives tend to change and align with sort of reputation and relationships.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because we were talking about some data, weren't we, the other day, that I think it was from B2B Marketing from last year. They did a survey, and I think that they surveyed about 100 companies that were doing ABM. And I think the numbers were more or less 55% were using ABM for new logo acquisition, and 35-40% were using it for existing client growth. So there's obviously a slight weighting more towards new logo acquisition. But as you said, the origins of ABM are in existing customer growth and existing customer retention. Right?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
You mentioned now about the 3 R's, actually. Can we pick up on that for a second? So not everyone's obviously familiar with the 3 R's methodology of reputation, relationships, and revenue, and the relationship that each one has with the other R's. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, we talk a lot internally in the agency and obviously publicly as well about the relationship between generating, building trust, and then how that correlates to stimulating demand within an account. So I think you could look at reputation and relationships almost as the umbrella that sits across that. You go back to the old adage that people don't buy from people they don't trust, and consequently, in order to start stimulating those commercial conversations, you need to build some trust within the accounts and obviously the key stakeholders within those accounts, and that does take time, especially when you're talking about 5, 6, 7-figure deals. So the first 2 R's of reputation and relationships, they sort of sit across that. They're almost a measure of trust, the increasing levels of trust you have within an account or a cluster of accounts or within a market. And there are, quantitative digital data points that feed into those first 2 R's. And there are also qualitative sort of softer feedback that feed into that. So, it's an incredibly robust reporting model. But it does require explanation up front. It does require illustration to the C-suite and to other key decision makers within the business, because they need to understand it. And the best way to articulate it to those C-suite is to actually use real life examples. Take the last 3 clients you've won that you want more of, analyze the buying journeys, not just what you're seeing in the CRM, but all of this self-attributed feedback that you get on the buying journeys nowadays. And then, overlay that onto the 3 R's model and almost paint that picture and show the decision makers in the business who are investing in the program how that journey played out. And then you can say, right, well, this is the model that we need to repeat, and this is how we need to monitor success, and this is how we need to hold our sort of commercial stakeholders to account for buying this.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, if people want to learn a bit more about the 3 R's, they can look on the website. We've written a lot of posts about that, and we've produced a lot of guides about the 3 R's and the importance. And also we talk about how we measure each one of the 3 R's. And I think a lot of companies that we work with clearly are embracing that methodology. Yeah. And I like to call the first 2 R's that you were talking about there kind of the early indicators of the revenue that's going to follow, because as you said, unless you've got that reputation rather, and you've got those relationships built, you're not going to see the revenue coming down the pipe. So I was just making some notes here, just thinking about some of the conversations I've been having with people around ABM, and obviously everything that we read on LinkedIn and elsewhere about ABM. And it's funny that a lot of people are talking about well, what is ABM? And when I have conversation with people about what ABM is, some people say, well, it's LinkedIn targeted advertising, it's display advertising, it's programmatic. What not many people talk about is actually where we see the greatest success from an ABM program, which is the value proposition work that we do, the insight that we do, and then obviously then the account experience that we create. So some people get a little bit confused about this whole idea about a value proposition, and they kind of turn off because they think, oh, we've got one already for the company. But what is an ABM value proposition?
Well, let's go back to what we believe the purest definition of ABM is, and then take it from there. So, at its purest sense, account-based marketing is treating a single account as its own market, a market of one. And then by definition, if you say, right, well, what does that proposition into that account, that single account that you're obsessed with growing and retaining, what does that mean in terms of a message? Well, clearly you need to take your product proposition, your brand proposition, your product proposition, and then overlay context for that account. So in order to make your product, market, brand proposition relevant to that account, you need to understand that account in great depth. So how do you do that? Well, clearly you need to go deep on the insights. You need to understand everything about that account, where they are today, where they're what their thoughts, pains, fears are in the future, what's driving their decision making at a company level. And obviously you need to understand who the buyers are in great depth and what's important to those guys personally. And then you end up with an ABM proposition. So there's a big difference between a brand proposition and an ABM proposition because, as an agency, we don't touch a client's brand proposition. The client's brand proposition is, tried and tested. They've grown off the back of that. Our job is to make that proposition, understand the context of the clients and the stakeholders, and make that brand proposition relevant to a very specific set of people within a specific account. And obviously that all comes off the back of desktop research, deep insights, market analysis, stakeholder research, understanding where those relationships are in the business today, and understanding where the opportunities are to engage those stakeholders with high impact creative and cut through the noise, really.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. It's interesting what you just said. Is that kind of the proposition or the value proposition is nothing to do with the wider brand. It's actually what is the value that you as a company or your solution can offer into a set of accounts. Yeah, and that's, that could be 100 accounts as opposed to the 1,000 accounts that you service, but those 100 accounts, how can you talk to them in a way which is going to resonate with them? And then that all gets translated, as you mentioned, the insights and the value proposition. That then gets translated into what we like to call an account experience. Yeah. How would make that tangible? What does that mean, an account experience?
Well, it's about creating an experience that you'd want to experience yourself as a buyer. And there are fundamental principles around it based on the starting point with that account. So it goes back to account benchmarking. Where are we, in that sort of 3 hours journey? And therefore, what does that account experience need to look like in the short, medium, and longer term? Because it will change over time. So, if you've got an account where you've got little or no penetration, all the decision makers you've had 10 years worth of relationships with have all changed and moved on, then clearly your yardstick for success will be different in that scenario versus a stable relationship where you're looking to grow and expand. So your account experience needs to generate awareness, rebuild trust with new decision makers, and depending on what that experience looks like will determine will come off the back of the insights that you do on that account at a stakeholder level and at an account level. But yeah, it'll be a combination of digital. It'll be a combination of human interaction touch points. It'll be a combination of peer-to-peer. Depending on who you're targeting. If you're targeting the chief technology officer or the chief security officer in a global brand, who is the subject matter expert within your business that has the credibility to communicate with that person. It's not always on the commercial team to develop those relationships. So the account experience will be designed and developed based on the starting point of that account and what your short, medium term objectives are, really.
Yeah. And let's talk, obviously, we're in February 2023, and obviously there's been lots of talk. There's been lots of talk about recession. We're seeing, layoffs in different technology companies. But the numbers are a little bit contradictory, really, because some numbers are showing that maybe we're not going to end it. Who knows? We haven't got a magic ball. But talk to me about why is it that, companies would look at ABM in a moment like now? Why, when obviously budgets are under revision and everyone's looking at everything, why is ABM the right play?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think a lot of the layoffs in the technology industry are a little bit misleading. I think there is a correction that's going on at the moment. I think technology companies have over-resourced in their sort of. There is a labour shortage. There's a quality labour shortage in the market, and I think technology companies have over-resourced, and there is a natural correction to that. So, we'll see how that plays out over the next 12 to 18 months. But clearly, the technology companies are trying to do more with less. They're trying to become more efficient, trying to focus their resources more. And actually, ABM aligns with that objective really well, because the whole premise of ABM is to focus your energies on your most important commercially viable accounts and target accounts. So by definition, you are investing your resources in your most important accounts that have the highest potential to drive ROI and growth for your own business. So there is a natural alignment with what's happening in the market and the objectives that the technology brands are clearly trying to achieve at the moment by gaining more efficiency. And I think we'll see what happens. But I think yes, it's incredibly sad to see so many people lose their jobs. But I think it is a correction rather than a sort of a downturn in the technology space, because clearly technology isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that there's lots of marketing that question marks about why you're doing it and how well it's impacting the business. And I think the advantage of ABM is clearly if you're saying, hey, there's these 100 accounts that are really, really important to us. 50% are our existing customers, 50% are major prospects that we've been circling around for some time now with our competitors. Or I think having that kind of laser focus, as you said, on those accounts and putting your marketing dollars on those is a wise thing to do in the current circumstances. Anyway.
It is for certain size of companies, and I mean, there's a lot of startups in tech, obviously, and who haven't properly established product market fit. They haven't got a tried and tested product proposition. They don't know how relevant they are to the market they're targeting. And ABM is not the right strategy for that scenario. But if you've got more established technology brands that have one SME, done really well in mid-market, and now are really starting to try and win those bigger high-ticket deals, or build some of their mid-market clients into enterprise accounts, then ABM is absolutely the right strategy for that, and you can focus your resources more efficiently.
Yeah, just two questions to finish off with, Alex. The first one I want to ask you about is about something which a lot of people actually don't know what it is, but a little bit about DBM and ABM, deal-based marketing and account-based marketing. Just when I was speaking to you, just thinking about some of the conversation I've been having with ABMers. And some people say, well, what is this deal-based marketing? How would you see the difference between deal-based marketing and account-based marketing?
Yeah, thanks for the heads up on that question, because it's a contentious question, isn't it? And it's a very, very fine line between the two. But you get DBM teams, established DBM teams within businesses whose job it is to support RFPs, win pitches, and quite often there's a handoff between the two functions. I think ABM's jobs is to stimulate that demand, drive those commercial conversations, and then if the opportunity has come through that ABM motion and is handed over to the deal-based marketing team, or the teams that exist to win and facilitate those larger, longer, more complex deals, then there is a relationship between those two teams, and the honest answer is the lines are blurred within a lot of companies. One person's DBM is another man's ABM. So it's difficult to give a precise question, say this is exactly what it is, because it does mean different things to different people. But ABM absolutely has a role, and there's plenty of examples where ABM has a role in supporting those DBM type scenarios. Making sure that they've got the right content, timely, ongoing insights, stakeholder research, then to make sure that the response to the RFPs and pitches are, highly tailored and land with impact.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things I would add to that. One, I think, is DBM is finite. Yeah. If you think ABM, you could argue that if you're working with a strategic account and let's say you're Microsoft and you've got a multi-billion-dollar or multi-million-dollar account that you work with, you're going to work with them for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, then your ABM could in theory be used forever. Yeah. Whereas DBM, deal-based marketing, has a limited time because you've got a deal. It's binary. It's 1 or 0. You win it or you don't win it. Yeah. So I think that's number one. And I was talking to one of the Let's Talk ABM podcast guests a couple of years ago, I think now. I like the way that they said is when they have sales leaders who come to them and say, hey, can you do ABM to this account? The question they said to them was, do you know anybody in this account? And if their answer was no, they said, well, that's deal-based marketing. We do account-based marketing with accounts that we know enough about, that we've got insights, that we've got relationships. Otherwise, it's DBM. So I think there's a couple of things there to add for the audiences. One is the time. Is it closing in a month or 3 months or 6 months? And the second one is the level of relationships you have. Very last question, Alex, for you, and I'll try not to throw any more, left fielders in there or whatever. Well, actually, it's a bit of a controversial question, actually, to finish off on, which is always fun. But, so we're an ABM agency. And as I said, you founded the agency 25 years ago, I think it was now, and obviously grown into the agency it is today. But not every company uses agencies. Not every technology brand or company wants to use an agency, and they do in-house or whatever. But what I'm not asking you to justify our existence, but what's that question that goes on in their minds between in-house and agency? All, some, little, none. What's going on in their minds?
I think, you could look at any professional service businesses that are selling, time, in essence. Although we don't sell time, we sell value. But your people-based businesses, your biggest cost is obviously the people, the investment you make in your staff. So from a client side perspective, agencies exist for either knowledge or resource or both. So it's our job to make sure that we stay ahead of the market. We know what good looks like, and we're very clear about who we can help and who we can add value to. And it's an agency's job to make to design their services to jigsaw into a client set of needs. And when I say jigsaw, it's about understanding the client-specific scenario. So what do they have a knowledge issue about? And is there a fit between our knowledge and their knowledge gaps? Okay, great, we can add value there. And internally, what resource do they already have in place that they clearly should take advantage of and maximize their investment in? And maybe there's a couple of specific skills around that resource that they don't have. Once again, we jigsaw in with that. So, the best agencies don't sell. They understand where they can add value most, and they overlay their sort of statement of work against that value add. So, knowledge and resource and how we integrate with those two functions, really.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that probably is from the kind of conversations that I have with customers and with the market is, but there's a whole thing around fast forward or accelerate. And I think, as you go back to your point around knowledge, as not every company has people with knowledge of ABM within their company, right? And therefore, we've been doing this for many, many years now. So we've got that acquired knowledge from, as you said, classic consultancy, that we can actually lend that knowledge to the organization. And very often what I love about the work that we do is we're helping to train marketers to become ABMers.
Yeah.
And some of our greatest success stories with our customers, I suppose, is when we see them becoming dedicated ABMers within our customers, and then the relationship then changes. I think that's number one. And I think the second one, just to add, is the fact that it's almost like, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I was a customer of the agency with two different companies for 15, 16, 17 years. And for me, it was a partnership. And so I always saw the 6, 7 people that were working on my account as just being an extension of my marketing team.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I didn't see much difference between my full-time employees in my marketing team and the people in the agency that were working for me. The relationship was there. It was, I almost got on better with the people at the agency than I did with my own employees. But I think that kind of partnership is really massively important, because you need to be able to lean on additional resource as and when you need it. And I think that's, for me, is a couple of things that I always take away from this kind of agency in-house debate, really.
Yeah, it's different for every company, and look, and it all comes back to that trust, doesn't it? I mean, and trust gets built over time. But and some clients, just have a short-term need, short-term knowledge resource, and there's that natural transfer of knowledge, and then they're off to the races and they can run it themselves, which is amazing. Yeah. And then there are other businesses that are growing in a different direction, and that they need a more ongoing set of resource and support. And that's where those longer-term commitments come in. It was 20 years, by the way. It wasn't 15, 16 years.
Was it? Oh, God. Okay. You got better memory than me. I'm going to throw one last 30-second question at you. Very last question, okay? What are you working on at the moment? What's keeping you awake at night? What are you doing that's going to make an impact?
Well, it is around technology, actually. I mean, it is about, obviously, we're jointly working on that technology message to try and clearly articulate what's the minimum tech clients really should be thinking about when they're embarking on an ABM. And it does tie back to how we believe clients should be measuring, and helping clients educate their internal stakeholders on that measurement, because there is a correlation. So yeah, that is front and center at the moment, is getting that technology message right, so clients don't overinvest too early.
Yeah.
And align it with their level of maturity. And by the way, maturity doesn't mean you're a 50-man startup. Maturity, you also get very ABM immature clients that are multi-billion-dollar businesses. So maturity isn't a company size thing. It's just how long you've been sort of trying to win those high value deals. So yeah, that's what's front and center at the moment. And then I'm sure agenda will change pretty shortly.
Good stuff. Well, listen, Alex, thanks so much for sharing some of your insight today, and it's been great talking to you, and all the best for everything you're working on.
Yeah, cheers, Dec.
If you enjoyed this episode of Let's Talk ABM, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Feel free to rate and review this podcast. Thanks so much for listening.